The visual identity, the brand strategist in me is like, wow, I love this branding. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. So, the title of this talk, it took me some time to come to actually. I need my clicker, yes. I'm like, why is it not moving? Yeah, it took me some time to come to it. And even about 3 weeks ago, this had a different title. So I'm going to talk today about reclaiming anti-racism. And this has been somewhat of an awkward topic for me to talk about, and I'll explain why. So it's also, maybe it's been a difficult realisation for me, this is something new to do. But as happens, more and more things have been leading me to speak to you all, this room of brave leaders, about this topic. Sometimes, you know when you have that thing where you know there's something you need to do, but you're like, oh my God, this is really scary, I don't want to do it. Yeah. And then, so God, or the universe, if that's what you think, or even that unexplained thing that can't explain stuff, will just remove your options, one by one, until the only option is to do the thing you need to do. And that's been the case for me around my work with anti-racism, but also specifically about the need to speak on this. And so, yeah, this had a different title until about 3 weeks ago. And then Jordan asked me a question, and I was like, oh no, I need to change the title to make it much clearer, because it's this, everybody's going to misunderstand what I'm talking about. But let me give you maybe the explanation of this title, which is we need to reclaim anti-racism, aka why no amount of diversity and inclusion will dismantle systemic racism. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, the ripple of applause, I appreciate it. I can equally see some of you breathing in. Some of you like, oh my God, this is quite awkward, isn't it? Some of you are a bit uncomfortable at this point. That's okay. We always say it around me and my business, we say that when we're feeling uncomfortable, when we're feeling those prickling feelings of awkwardness, when we're feeling even that bit defensive, that's our oppression radar. It's an opportunity for us to maybe just sit with that discomfort, figure out where it's coming from. Sit with the discomfort. Our instinct tells us we need to move away from discomfort, right? We need to minimize it. We need to silence it. We need to quickly move on. Actually, as brave leaders, we need to just sit with it sometimes. And this is an uncomfortable title, right? It's an uncomfortable thought, because we may be passionate about diversity and inclusion. We might say that it's something we really believe in, but this is an uncomfortable truth that I know from my work with brands, that I know from my own lived experience, that I know even seeing events in the world, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So let's start with the why of this. This cartoon. Maybe, and actually, do you know what? David, even in his first talk, he really spoke to this. Do you remember? And I'm going to take you on a bit of a timeline. So this little cartoon, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What do we need to do? Let's check the box. We need to tick the box, and that box is we need to talk about it. Even in the doing of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm going to argue that this is still true. Even if you're doing stuff, it's still true. So let me take you on that timeline I talked about. So I'm going to take you back to about 5 years ago. There was a lot of this happening, right? A lot of talk. Actually, the talk at the time was mostly about diversity and inclusion, maybe no E in the centre of it. Then the conversation continued. So we'll start 2018, 2019 it continued, and then some people started challenging this thought around diversity and inclusion. Like, no, it's not enough. We need to include. equality into it. I mean to include equality. So people did, the sensible thing, had a great acronym. They simply added an E. Good, job done. Add the E in there. That E is for equality. People are like, no, because equality, and I'll show you why equality is the issue. It needs to be about equity. Oh great, we don't need to change the acronym. Keep it as E, but now it is equity. And that was the case. Still a load more talking. Then 2020 happened, and two things happened in 2020. Well, several things happened in 2020. And I saw this in our own business. And what I say to you is that throughout this, I am going to speak from the I, because this is a journey that I am going on in my business line. It's a journey I'm going on with our clients. It's a journey that I'm being called and pushed to go on so often. And then every time I deviate from this journey, it brings me back, sometimes really painfully. So I'm going to speak to the I. And this was, I guess, a shift in around 2020. A couple of things happened. The first one was that the world entered this global pandemic. And the pandemic created an experience that everybody was having, but people were having it in wildly different ways. And it really showed, so I will say, before this point, when we're talking, we as a brand and strategy consultancy, I set up Brand One Me in 2016, and we were talking about social justice. We actually were calling it the sharp end of social change, because even I didn't have the language to describe the work we were doing. And then slowly we started to talk about justice, and our work was niche. It was niche because there were only certain organisations talking about justice. 2020 that changed, because this one experience that so many of people across the world are having, but people are experiencing differently, meant there was a shared conversation, let's say, about justice, about injustice, about who's getting access to healthcare, who's dying and who's living, who is able to enjoy, who gets to stay at home, who has to go out to work, who gets to enjoy the comfort of having a separate room to work in, who has to have a background on, because actually my working environment, I don't want my colleagues to see it, right? This is the everyday inequity. So it kind of changed the game, it changed the conversation a little bit. The other thing that happened, and David also spoke to this, the other thing that happened in 2020 was the resurgence of interest in the Black Lives Matter movement. And I am quite intentional with those words. I've heard people say Black Lives Matter in 2020. No, to be clear, that was an existing movement. Black lives did not start to matter as of June 2020. Although at points, to some employers, it kind of felt like it did. That movement was done and existed. And also, then I also said this, the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. I had to correct myself, because I'm like, no, that movement was surging. That movement was movementing. What happened was there was a renewal in the agenda. So, I'm looking at the time going, Collette Philip. So, the timeline we're there. So, we're in 2020, and something really interesting happened around this talk. The talk started, I guess at one point the talk went really quiet, because in June 2020, there was a renewal of interest, and companies and brands were caught slipping, frankly, because we've been talking a lot about this, but it was exposed. There were some huge, big gaps, right? There was some stuff it wasn't covering. So as David talked about, there was some really knee-jerk kind of, very quick, we must do something now, or people going, oh, we don't know what to do. And from that we don't know what to do, obviously we know this, as leaders sometimes we're motivated to act, but we act maybe prematurely. Or we act with good intention, but maybe we underestimate the scale of what we're trying to do. So there were some big, bold commitments made in 2020, that by the end of 2021, people were starting to realise the scale of what they'd signed up to. And they wanted to find a way to maybe move it into, they said, we need to prioritise it, we need to make it a priority, actually, we've already got another area where we're taking action on. So they started to take these bold promises they've made around anti-racism, even the language of anti-racism, and subsume it back into this. You know, because the E word is in there, equity is in there, and that equity is a shared goal. Like that's a shared goal with anti-racism. Well, right, so we're going to subsume it in. And then we fast forward now in my timeline, so I'm looking at time to 2023, right? So we see in 2021, so you know there was this flurry of interest in 2020, like big bold claims. Some people stayed silent, but even some the organisations, the companies that wanted to show willing, that had the best of intentions, made some commitments that they then were like, well, we're going to really struggle to follow through. Let's hide it back in this, and maybe we'll be able to do something. And then by 2023, where are we now? Well, we're seeing DEI budgets being cut. We're seeing redundancies. Do you remember all those roles that were created in 2020? Entry-level role. We need to bring people in. We need to diversify. But actually, well, who's being hit by the redundancies? Heidi just spoke to it right with the leadership stats. There's another one. So I spent the first decade of my career in advertising. And now, because I run an agency, I'm back in the same circles again, reluctantly I will say. And I saw this, I was so mad. I think, you know what, Heidi said it too, sometimes anger can be a good thing. Anger is a very good thing at points, righteous anger. Anger can be a motivator, and you should be angry about injustice. And I saw this stat, and despite, I don't know, 200 odd agencies signing a pledge in 2020, latest stats around diversity in the industry show that there are more all-white leaderships in leadership teams in agency world than ever before. So not only have we made promises, actually we've gone back on them, it's gone back. So yeah, I was angry. 2023 is looking like this. And so I'm going, this talk is not working. And this talk is drowning out some really big conversations that we need to be having around anti-racism right now. So it feels a bit like this, right? I saw this actually on Blair Imani. If you don't follow her, she is an amazing kind of social justice educator, or at Blair Imani on Insta. And I saw this on her Insta in September 22. And I use this all the time in my client workshops, right? You know, people, if my clients here, they will have seen this before. Because as much as it's September 2022, Blair Imani posted it, and on the day I saw it and I felt seen. Come 2023, even more true. Remember that, those few weeks when everyone cared about anti-racism? That was nice. That was nice. My husband described it yesterday. He said it was a bit like, you know, when you have a massively cloudy day, as we do in this country, maybe a season where it's been raining loads and it's like really grey, and then the sun doesn't come out, but you can see the sun kind of behind the clouds and you can kind of see the warmth. It was a bit like that. For a moment, we were like, actually, there's this global conversation about structural and systemic racism. And it was a beautiful thing. And seeing brands, seeing, you know, at a personal level, having organisations come to me, Collette Philip, who've been doing this work for several years, and go, do you know what, we've realised we really need to be looking at what we need to do to be anti-racist, and we need to look at it from our organisational, from our brand lens. It was so joyful. But that was a few weeks. I mean, with some of our clients, I will say it's lasted a lot longer, primarily because if they're working with us, with me as founder, I make it last longer than a few weeks. If you sign up to work with Brand By Me, believe me, it's not going to be a few weeks, you'll be talking about anti-racism. But yeah, it felt nice, it felt a little bit like this. But people started to renege on promises, and the very laser focus on anti-racism became lost in a noise, and a noise that has been obscured by DEI. And here's why. I really love this quote, and I thought long and hard about it. I mean, you'll see I love a lot of quotes. You're going to see a few in here. I love a good quote, as does my friend and co-conspirator Suleiman, who is a member of Team Brand By Me, works alongside me on our work, and he loves a good quote as well. We love a good quote. But this one, and I'm going to read it to you, in case it's a bit small, but anyway, because I think it's powerful. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. Audre Lorde said this in 1979 at a feminism conference, speaking specifically from her lived experience as a black queer woman, and speaking at that point about, I guess, the struggle for liberation. And this quote kind of, does explain exactly why we need to reclaim anti-racism. And one of the things we need to reclaim it from is the kind of bigger, slightly vague and confusing conversation around diversity, equity and inclusion. And I'll give you the reason why. So, if we're talking about the master's house, the master refers to the oppressor, right? That's very clear, and it uses the visual metaphor, I guess, of slavery, of enslaved people, the master's house, right? So if we're talking about the master's house, the house of the oppressor, it says we can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. It makes sense, right? The master's not going to let us. DEI, and I'm really, this is a brave thing for me, I suddenly got scared. But DEI, I've got to be honest, it's not just one of the master's tools. Actually, where often the E is removed from it, it's simply an invitation into the master's house. Let's think about this for a second. Let's think about diversity. Who is positioned as diverse, right? And diverse from what? Right? That's who's positioned as diverse. Inclusion, what are we being included into here? Right? So the diversity and the inclusion bit is simply an invitation into the master's house. But let's be clear about the master's house. The master's house is set up for the master. Yeah? The oppressor. Yeah? The person that benefits from the status quo, and that status quo being oppression. Right? That's who it's set up for. So of course, even if we issue an invitation into the house, no matter how nice the wording is, no matter how pretty the invitation looks, fundamentally it's an invitation into that space. That space was made for the master. It's only safe for the master. It's the master's house. Of course it is. Think about your own homes. It's made for you, right? That's right. So, when we're looking at diversity and inclusion, that's where we are. It's just an invitation. When we add the E of equity, but in a sandwich, in the middle, or even at the beginning, so if you could do EDI, at the beginning of this, it becomes at best a tool, but it is still one of the master's tools, because, and I'll explain why actually in my next slide. So, but the efforts to, I guess, subsume and make anti-racism a part of this wider DEI is only going to ever do what it says in the second half of this quote. Temporarily. It's only a temporary fix. It won't drive long-term change. And that's why, even if these big, bold promises were made just 3 years ago, we're now seeing them they're just not lasting, and this is why. So, Shireen Daniels is an amazing anti-racist thinker, educator, trainer, works in corporate spaces. Really brilliant to follow on LinkedIn. It's a real education just following on LinkedIn. And she wrote this in the book, which I absolutely recommend. If you can't see it, it's the Anti-Racist Organisation. Fantastic book. A really practical book about embedding anti-racism into organisations. There's a lot of really practical work, and you'll see me quote from it often. So she says, in the 60 years since diversity education was established, and remember, diversity was set up first and foremost to establish racial equity for black people, particularly the discipline came from the US, that the issues entrenched in workplace systemic racism have been smoothed over in order to fit the generalized traditional model of DEI education, because it soothes the conscience of decision makers who want to be applauded for doing the right thing, even if the right thing makes no material difference to the people most impacted. And that's kind of the thing. DEI is this. DEI is designed to assuage and prioritize the comfort, the particularly actually the comfort of white, cis, male, heterosexual, non-disabled leaders at the expense of minoritized communities. I would also argue, because I'm here talking to you going, you're brave leaders. Brave, not just brave as in the adverb, but also the acronym that David posited. Or at least you're here to be that, right? You're here to listen and be that. So I'm talking to you as maybe like-minded folks going, I know this is uncomfortable to hear. It's constantly uncomfortable for me too. But still, we have to sit in that place of discomfort. Because some of you, in the first session, David asked us what we're scared of, right? And we said failing. We said not being successful. We said we're scared of being called out. I heard someone say being called out. These are exactly the fears that DEI work assuages. It's designed to make leaders feel comfortable, even if it makes no material impact. No material difference, to the people most impacted. Because here's the thing, people are, I get really comfortable, I forget this. The words white supremacy, I can see some of you, woo! There's whistles, right? There's whistles at this point. People, visible intake of breath. Collette, really? What? This is a conference about leadership. But often, in our work, we see, racism was invented to facilitate white supremacy. That's it. It was designed, race was created to facilitate racism. Racism was created to create a hierarchy. And the hierarchy has whiteness at the top and everyone else below. The mistake that we often make in these spaces is we see racism and white supremacy as a threat. So think about Jaws, right? The film Jaws from 1984, maybe? And the shark, right? You think about the shark in the water. So you see the little fin coming and you're like, oh my God, the threat. Look what happens when everyone sees that fin. People running from the water, screaming, ah! Oh my God, come on, let's get out of the water. But here's the thing about white supremacy. It isn't the shark, it's not a threat. It's the water. The whole water. It's the ecosystem in which we operate in. It's the way the system was designed. So David said it. He said that many people, in that black square somewhere in 2020, people have become increasingly disappointed, disillusioned, and let down by systems and processes that weren't fit for purpose. And quite a lot of it around those anti-racism promises that were unfulfilled is because fundamentally they were built from systems and processes that are steeped in or from and around this ecosystem of white supremacy. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a choice, ultimately. So I've told you so far, I've said we need to reclaim anti-racism, and I've said we need to reclaim it. One of the things we need to reclaim, we need to bring it back, we need to reclaim it from diversity and inclusion, and even DEI, even JEDI, so where the J is for justice, even, as I saw recently, REDI, so with the R for racial justice, even, and then I'll stop, IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, anti-racism on the end. We've got to reclaim it, anti-racism, we've got to reclaim it back, we've got to reclaim it back from all of these things. So at this point, I'd like you to do something with me. I'd like you to head to slido.com on your devices, enter the code, Brave Collette, and I'm asking you, here you go, to make a choice. You've got three options at this point in the journey, right? So I'm taking you on a journey, and I've got a few minutes left. So are you going to do nothing at this point? You've heard what I've said, you're like, Collette, no, I do not believe you. Be honest, by the way, because you can do it anonymously, no one will know if it's you. You can do nothing, you can stick with DEI, or you can reclaim anti-racism. Given the heading of the slide, but I just want to check if you're with me or not. If you're not, it's fine. David said this, we need to be open to other options. I'm just going to see how many of you. Bear in mind, I've still got a few minutes to speak, so I'm going to continue speaking regardless, but the point is, I want to see how you're going. Yeah. I'll give it a couple more minutes. Keep it going. Yeah. Keep people saying, Collette, you know what? I don't hear from you. I don't hear it. We're going to stick with DEI because we think it's right. That's okay. We're going to keep going. So I'm looking at the time. I need to get through. So, can we go back to my choose your own adventure slide, please? Thank you for keep going. So, we had some options. So far, I mean, keep it going. So far, I saw no one saying option A. A few people saying B. Now, you know what? I hear what you're saying, but we're going to stick with our DEI. We're going to, and most of you saying we're going to reclaim our anti-racism. Remember in the Choose Your Own Adventure books, if you ever read them as a kid, there was always a thing you did. It basically was a book where on key pages you got to make a decision, right? And if you were clever about it, which I was one of those people, you'd leave your finger in the previous page before making your decision, just in case you need to go back. So let me show you what happens if you chose the first two. So if you chose to do nothing or to stick with DEI. Because, no, and also I'm not happy. I've just used this slide because I really want to do this. No, it's not that. I think as brave leaders, I'm going to encourage you, I'm going to give you a choice and go, you can leave your finger in that page. So let's go back again. Because I'm going to encourage you to make a different choice. But the simple reason is if you decided to do nothing, which no one did so far when I saw it, I'm going to just remind you that we're at a conference for brave leaders. And the inaction around brave leadership, in line with all of those acronyms, being bold, resilient, and so on, ending with ethical, means that you can't do nothing. If you stick with DEI, I might encourage you just to stick with this and wait till the end of the presentation. So I'm going to take you on kind of how we need to reclaim anti-racism now. But if you did, anti-racism, yay! What about you? Because no, that is the choice, and that's what I'm going to talk about for the time I've got left. So first one, if we're to reclaim anti-racism, I think I've got 4.5 things we need to do, which I need to go through really quickly, so I've looked at the time. So the first one is we need to, as I said to you, white supremacy is not just a shark, it's not just a threat, it is the water. It's the ecosystem in which we breathe. So it means we need to be focused on dismantling white supremacy, which means we need to understand how it shows up. We need to not be fearful of those words, and we need to be unashamedly about focusing on it. This actually was a billboard, by the way, that Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream brand, had in around the US in 2020. We must dismantle white supremacy. We need to be really bold with it as well. We need to be really clear and intentional about those words. But we also need to remember, I love this from Wolf Owners, that culture is strategy for breakfast. And then they're going to move right forward on. So culture, there are some hallmarks of organisational cultures that work to both, that show up in organisations where white supremacy is present. These are some of the cultural characteristics. This body of work exists at whitesupremacyculture.info if you want to look at more. But these are all the hallmarks, there are 15 characteristics. Also in our work, what we've found is these are also the areas where, these are the cultural traits that will work against your anti-racism work. So, there are 15 here. I won't go through them because I'm running out of time. But all I will say is, these are also hallmarks of toxic cultures, it's supposed to say, but these will directly work against your anti-racism work. So if we're part of dismantling white supremacy, is addressing these negative cultural traits in our organisations. And as leaders, that's what we need to do. The third one, got two more. Is we need to be intersectional in our approaches. Now, I've got a quote up there from Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, who I often think of as, but she is, she's the inventor of intersectionality. What it means very simply, intersectionality is simply this. We cannot look through anti-racism through a singular lens. We have to look at how how racism sits alongside other systems of oppression, other isms. So, for example, when we're looking at anti-racism work, we can't just think about race. We also need to look at how race and, for example, racism and ableism overlap. We have to look at how racism and sexism overlap. is really important in our anti-racism work. So if we're reclaiming anti-racism, because this is an area where often our work to tackle racism falls short if we're only looking at race as a silo. We have to be intersectional. It doesn't mean we can say it's not just about race. It has to be about race, but it means we have to understand that overlap too. We have to prioritise equity. You'll have seen this before, and this is a redraw. I had this illustration custom drawn, but you can see the difference. You know when that shift from equality to equity happens? We've got to prioritise equity. It cannot just be about firstly doing nothing, but certainly not one size all fits this. You can see the issue with it. It has to be about equity. But we also must remember that equity is not the goal. It is justice. Justice is our goal here. The idea is not just to focus on solutions that enable equity, it's also to make sure that we are working towards liberation, that where the barriers are removed. We have to avoid gatekeepers. I've got my person here. Gatekeepers, I've got my guy here. Gatekeepers are the people that block access to minoritized communities, resources or opportunities only happen through them. Our current government is an example of racial gatekeepers. Bear in mind it's not just white people in the hierarchy of white supremacy. Racial gatekeepers, we have to be clear. And that also for ourselves, if we're reclaiming anti-racism, we need to make sure we're also not being gatekeepers. We need to make sure that we are prioritising liberation and justice, and we're doing so for collective action and for our communities. And finally, and this is my quote, we need to use our power for good. Which means, and I love this quote from Toni Morrison, I tell my students, when you get these jobs that you have been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free someone else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. This is not just a grab bag candy game. Individualism works against anti-racism. It has to be collective effort. It means we can't relinquish our power. We can't behave as if we're powerless. We can't, as Heidi said, we can't sit there and be silent. We need to find our voices and use our power. We all have it. This group of brave leaders really do. So yeah, we're reclaiming anti-racism. And even if you said you're sticking with DEI, I would encourage you to be brave and step into doing these things along the way to reclaim anti-racism. We need to dismantle white supremacy, and that means starting with the culture of our organisations. We need to take an intersectional approach, meaning that we need to look at how racism intersects with other systems of oppression. We need to prioritise equity, but make sure justice is our end goal, no gatekeeping, and we need to use our power for good. I feel like I'm out of time, so I'm going to say, if you have questions, fill them in on the slider. There's a Q&A box. I will look at it. Fill them in, or come and find me at a break. And if you need to connect with me, that's me. Thank you so much, everyone.
Collette doesn't play. I just wanted you to know that anybody who has not met Collette Philip in your life, she doesn't play. Now, it was so interesting because I saw when you were hitting some points, right, I could see people kind of like heads were going, shoulders were going up. Edges were being snatched, and I think it's really powerful, as I said at the beginning. You don't have to necessarily agree with everything, but it's really good to put somebody out of their comfort zone to start a conversation. And that's what I did. But I really appreciate it.